Welcome to the FilmGamer podcast, season 4, episode 16, number 50 overall. I have to call out producer Craig Horlbeck friendly on this one because his opinion about Mickey 17 echoes something that I've seen on Reddit Box Office, on Film Twitter, on a lot of places I've seen, and I don't like it. And if you listen to The Town, which is a great podcast, and these are some of the thoughts as well echoed by Matt Bellany, who runs The Town, and somewhat across the whole Ringer Spotify podcast network, is this the attitude of this film has no business costing as much as it does. Now, for something like the Marvel movies, which are sort of an institution unto themselves, they're a brand series of films that are made by the same people time and time again. I can understand if there are some negative trends. Lord knows the value piece of these movies has gone down as time goes on, post, Infinity Ward saga and whatnot. The multiverse saga has been disappointing. That is where you have room to criticize a movie like Captain America Brave New World on how much it costs. But to go after, and I'm not saying that they're going after, they were asked their opinion, they're covering it, was part of their weekend podcast, and say this movie does not deserve to cost as much as it does, I feel is a very anti-creative, anti-filmmaking sentiment. What movies? So, just so you know, Mickey 17 cost $118 million. It opened last weekend, March 7th. First weekend in March. It's been a successful launching pad for movies like 10,000 BC, which I have on Blu-ray, and 300, which I have on DVD. Watchmen also later opened on this date. So it's been a successful launch date for movies. And I like March because it frequently is sort of like the spring blockbuster month. In the last decade, um, Easter weekend for Catholics has kind of taken over as like the big weekend of the spring. But Mickey 17 opened at 19 million, per theater average, $9 short of 5,000. Opening to 20 million with a theater average of 5,000 is good. To me, that's the bar. I understand with actuals, it's a bit below that. It's a million short of 20, and it's $9 short of 5,000. But this is a well-reviewed movie from an Oscar-winning director. The guy, Hong Joon-ho, accepted 4 Oscars: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay, which he all won himself. He co-wrote with some other people, but um, and best international film in its inaugural renaming. Um, Let me just go by for reference. Um, some other movies for inflation. This is a sci-fi film. Okay. A sci-fi. I know it's not really an action film, but it's a sci-fi film based on a book, Mickey Seven, a comic book. Um, and let me just go through some of original-ish um, intellectual property that is comparable. In 1993, Jurassic Park, which cost 63 million, opened, and it was based on a novel by Michael Crichton. Today, that movie would cost $139 million. Okay, that is about 20 million more than Mickey 17. The Matrix, which opened in 1999 around this date, cost uh, in the 60 million range, which would similarly bring it to inflation to 120 million. Mickey 17 cost 118 million, okay? It is a reasonable figure when you look at that movie visually, just going from the trailers, and I haven't seen it yet. It looks good. So everybody saying this movie has no business costing as much as it does. Do you know how many Oscars Steven Spielberg had when he made Jurassic Park? It's gonna sound crazy, but zero. Okay? Do you know how many Oscars the Wachowskis, forget what they had at the time, what they have now? Zero. Okay? This guy is more qualified to direct that sort of movie than Spielberg was for Jurassic Park. Just in terms of fan favorite. And, as well written as Jurassic Park is, I have to wonder if it starred, it's a very white-centered film, male-dominated film. There's a good role for Laura Dern, but um, I just wonder in the landscape, would Jurassic Park be as super well reviewed today as it was back then? Now, granted, it would have still the eye-opening sequences, the good subtext and stuff, so I think it would review well. Um, Mickey 17 is certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. It's in the 70s on the popcorn meter and stuff. So it has a good reaction. Like, it has a decent critical reception. It's not like a critical flop or anything like that. So, personally, I think for if you're gonna take a chance on a movie and have it cost, 118 million and you're Warner Brothers, what's making movies for? I mean, on Metacritic, which is way harder to score against, this is a green. This is 72 on Metacritic. Generally favorable reviews, generally favorable user ratings. You look at the trailer and the visuals are great. It's director of photography is Darius Kanji, who made or who shot movies like Seven and Panic Room, and I know people don't like it, but Alien Resurrection looks amazing if you go back and watch it. It's an incredibly slick looking movie. He also shot Uncut Gems, and you can listen to the Big Picture podcast with Sean Fennessy, where in Bong Joon-ho gets interviewed, and he talks about how he worked with Darius Kanji on this film, and Darius Kanji wasn't super used to special effects shots, and as a result, got to learn more on this movie. So I think that if you want to go by the faults of this movie, it does go to some faults that I personally have that I think the internet is unwilling to admit. The best example of like attacking this point of view um, is to go to the slash film article. So I'm calling out slash film on this. I'm calling out a lot because it's, our 50th episode. It's special. Um, so my issue is like they do an article, 5 reasons why Mickey 17 flopped at the box office. Ryan Scott wrote this. Ryan Scott, I'm calling you out. Some of this um, analysis, if you want to call it, I wouldn't, is not good. And frankly, represents the tone I've had so far in this podcast episode is that you guys just don't know what you're talking about. For starters, he says Mickey 17 was way too expensive. Their way around that is just basically cutting out an arbitrary number and being like, oh, well, it should cost 60 million, or if it cost 80 million, this would be great. And my question is like, where are you going to cut this? This is a sci-fi, big sci-fi movie about a planet hopping spaceship. Okay? It's like you can't just cut, $60 million off the budget of this movie. It's ridiculous for a movie to look that good visually. Again, this isn't a Marvel movie that we're dealing with. This is a movie, okay? And again, I haven't seen Mickey 17, so I may see it and not like it. I'll get to the reason why I think I might not like it and why I was kind of on the edge of seeing it and decided not to. But for Mr. Scott to just point out, oh, this was too expensive because it needs blah, blah, blah to break even. Let me tell you, Mr. Scott, There are so few movies now that are funded directly from the studio. Seth Rogen was at South by Southwest Festival this weekend. It's a festival in Texas. Ready Player One opened there. It's become, in recent years, a launchpad for many movies. Blackberry was there the other year. Joyride, a bunch of other movies launched there in the spring. And what he said was, when we made Superbad, the studio bought our script, they cast the film, a director was chosen, and that's how the movie was made. That is not how movies are made now at all. What happens is a casting agency finds a group of people to bunch together, people they want to promote, and they basically pre-package a film with actors or directors and join them together and group them together. So an entire film is already packaged. There hasn't been any creative process made. And they go to the studios and bring them this package for a cut of the film. Even though that they creatively, sometimes their production companies don't have anything to do with the actual filmmaking progress process. That is how films are made now. It is anti-creative, and I understand that it's the economic functions of how Hollywood works right now. But this is Warner Brothers doing what they should be doing and what they arguably should be able to do best, which is meet up with a filmmaker who we all know is good. I would consider Bong Joon-ho, in terms of spectacle, um, capable of delivering on the level of Spielberg. Now, his one issue, which I think a lot of people have come across, is that his tonal whiplash is what many would assert to be um, on purpose. And people find that kind of bizarre tonal whiplash between comedy and drama kind of confusing. It's something that works really well in his Korean films, not so much in his English language films. But Warner Brothers is like, this guy won the Oscar. He's obviously very talented. If you're like me and you saw Okja, there are flashes of Spielberg in it. So I think that is good. Could they have probably managed the tone of this movie better? I think so. Sci-fi comedy, if it's this high stakes, I don't think quite works. Comedy is always better for lower stakes, so it would have like sort of required a different director. I would just, if I were an executive, push in a bit more action, and there are some other changes that I'd make that I'd get to. But um, saying Warner Brothers spent too much money, it's like this is what they do. The attitude that this guy and a bunch of big-headed Redditors, I don't know how else to describe it, saying this movie had no business costing this much. My question to you is, what business is it of yours? You know, um, if you listen to the Indie Film Hustle podcast by Matt Ferrari, he interviews a producer, an old, Jewish producer on the podcast, and um, he reminds me of like Roger Corman or Erwin Winkler or a bunch of other producers like Mel Brooks. Um, and his whole thing that he says is that the attitude that the rest of the industry has on chiming in how much things cost is none of our business. These people on Reddit are acting like they personally paid for this movie, and you didn't. Like, you can elect not to see Mickey 17. I'm electing not to see Mickey 17 until it comes out on video on demand, where I rented Wicked this week, or streaming. I'd wait for that because the theater seems A, it's expensive, and B, not worth the risk because you want a good time. And I usually only go if I know, regardless of reviews or stuff, or if this is the director's worst version of this film, am I still going to have a good time? The answer is yes. I mean, I went and saw Flight Risk, for God's sake. I knew that movie wasn't going to be good, but I like Topher Grace. I watch Mark Wahlberg movies. Mel Gibson is a total nut. But it seemed like a good enough time to me. It was mercifully short. That movie was ridiculously expensive because you look at that movie and you're like, this cost 25 million. It's three people in a dodo plane for 90 minutes. Like, what? Like, that's more of a money laundering scheme than this movie. Like, this movie has, just looking at it, Oscar worthy visuals. It's not a Marvel movie on a conveyor belt and stuff. This was Warner Brothers planting their stake, saying, we're gonna make this, creativity is a priority for us. And you would think, why would they spend so much money? Because how can that be profitable for business? Well, as somebody who's taken a few business classes in university, let me just say this. People are artists and they want to make art that is good. And when you make a better movie, that is good for business. Okay. If studios decided purely, acting purely based off of profit, Mission Impossible would have ended at 3 because Mission Impossible 3 ended, it lost money. It cost 150 million, made 133 domestically, and then Cruise and his producing partner Paul Wagner took a big chunk of Paramount's DVD sales. And my brother bought it on DVD and stuff. So why did they continue with that series? You know why they continued with that series? Because even though Mission Impossible 2, which I personally like, was the highest grossing movie of the year 2000. Yes, look it up worldwide. Domestically, yes, The Grinch beat it, but worldwide, it was one of the biggest movies of the year 2000. I like it a lot. It's honestly like a swell action movie and stuff. Great Hans Zimmer score, you know, excellent writing, stripped down to like basically a notorious Hitchcock riff. You got Anthony Hopkins showing up for basically a cameo. Then you get like Gleeson, Tandy Newton, kind of doing what she does best as kind of like this slinky noir figure. Tom Cruise's hair is excellent and wild in that movie. You have John Woo with the doves. Honestly, the staging of that movie I consider to be fantastic. Again, Hans Zimmer's score and whatnot. I find that it delivers. But it's a horribly reviewed movie because people find the plot absolutely ridiculous. People find the changing of the masks and stuff too absurd. They weren't willing to suspend disbelief. It's a pretty bare bones movie. And it's like Mission Impossible. What if it took place all in Australia? That goes against the international flavor of Mission Impossible. So people didn't like it for that and various other reasons. So in Mission Impossible 3, which takes a long time to get going. Tom Cruise hires this guy who's never directed a feature film before. His name is J.J. Abrams, and they decide to hire Philip Seymour Hoffman to play the villain, and they hire TV writers, from Alias, and he basically makes an Alias TV show as a Mission Impossible movie. And you can see the lack of chops that he has with the camera because, it's all very shaky cam, which is very much of that trend and is relatively easy compared to, laying down dolly tracks and planning your shots a lot more with a steady cam. Um, so what happened there? The movie lost a bunch of money, um, so why keep going? Because isn't profit the end game? The answer is no. Paramount was smart enough to realize, look, this movie, despite all, is got better reviews than Mission Impossible 2. And people liked it and were receptive. So this is worth continuing. And it was because of that that they went to Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. And that movie reignited the fuse on Mission Impossible. And then, in a competitive summer, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation um, did pretty well. Not quite as breakout as Mission Impossible 4. And at the time, people were saying for Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, oh, this is opening against Sherlock Holmes 2 and Alvin and the Chipmunks. It needs to move. It needs to move. And it turns out that Tom Cruise and Brad Bird brought a film. You know, they brought a film to the masses, and it was better than Alvin and the Chipmunks. Um, the Squeakle, I believe. Yeah, 2011. That tracks, or it could be Chipwrecked. Um, and Sherlock Holmes 2. Um, yeah, 2011. So yeah, it would have been Chipwrecked. Um, and people were saying it should move. Turns out it was the best movie, plays, does phenomenally well over Christmas. And then, they move back to the competitive summer and they still do pretty well. They only drop about, you know, uh, 50 million or so. And they're like, wait, if we concentrate this now, because Mission Impossible 5 was well reviewed as well, and we put all our chips in the bag, what can we do here? And then you get Mission Impossible Fallout. Boom, explosion. And then now, you have Dead Reckoning Part 1, which has the problem of the heel of like calling itself Part 1, which you should never, ever, 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 ever do. Why Hollywood continues to do it drives me insane, but you should never do that because it leads to less grosses. And it basically ran into a Barbenheimer train, didn't book enough theaters, and lost business. And it still performed pretty well, Dead Reckoning Part 1, but it was enough for them to not do Dead Reckoning Part 2, but rather the Final Reckoning, which is sort of like a compromise on the title and whatnot. And it's super expensive, but looks really good. And it's opening over Memorial Day. It's one of my most anticipated movies of the year, alongside F1, which just came out with a trailer, and Avatar 3 Fire and Ash. Because at the end of the day, it's a question I would like to ask a lot of people, and people asked this when Challengers came out, another movie that I don't really like, but answers the essential question of what are we doing here as filmmakers, if not making cinema? You have the option to make cinema. It's like, why spend all that money? And I say, why not? Like, what are we doing here if not trying to entertain people, to give people the best of what we can do, to assemble the best people in the world at a job to craft entertainment? That's, to me, it's incredibly worthy pursuit. So that's why I think that the budgetary problem isn't an issue, because you're partnering with extremely talented people to deliver a story that people might like. And the other reality that these wannabe armchair box office analysts want to get behind that they don't know, and this is speaking specifically to the Redditors. I'm not talking about people who are, radio pundits for a living, a job that I would like very much. Thank you, Ringer, if you're actually listening, please hire me. Um, is this um, theatrical matters a bit less nowadays than it did before, and I'll tell you what the breaking point sort of was. It was The Northman, the Robert Eggers film, which had a lot of hype by Focus Features, and everyone was like, "Go see this movie! Go see this movie! Go see this movie!" I didn't see it in theaters. I rented it when it came out on demand, and I didn't think it was good at all. But because I and many other people were like, I don't want to see it in theaters, but I want to see it on demand, Focus Features made a ton of money on The Northman, and it basically made the film, which cost $80 million, profitable. Um, and this was a movie that, if I look it up here, basically bombed in theaters for many people. It looked cool. The problem is that it's a super long movie, and B, kind of not a very good movie. I'm not the biggest fan of Eggers, but he brings the craftsmanship. This movie cost 80 million and made 34 million, and then 35 internationally. Worldwide, it made like just under 70 million, and people are like, "Oh no!" But the thing is that movie studios on demand do not have the same revenue split they do with theaters. They don't take just 65%. It's closer to 80%. So Universal, who, Focus Features is a division of, realized, hey, if we take these movies to video on demand and then even sometimes charge a premium, which is what they did basically when Trolls uh, 2 came in at the beginning of the pandemic. They got a flood of money a huge influx of cash quickly. And they're like, oh, well, why don't we just do this all the time? So then they arbitrated like a ridiculous number of like, oh, if a Universal Pictures film makes less than 50 million, then we'll spring it to premium video on demand earlier and collect money that way because we've already paid for a marketing campaign on it. And basically what that did is that it collapses windows and it doesn't upfront affect attendance at the movie theater because if I see a movie, well, I'll tell you this for me. If I see a movie and it's 20 bucks, 25 bucks, sometimes even 30 bucks on the cable on demand, because I don't rent through Amazon and Apple, I don't trust them, um, because you're not buying anything from them, and you're also doing it through streaming, which is in terms of packet loss way more unreliable for presentation. Um, yeah, it's it's not a reliable form to watch movies, you know. Just ask the people who watch the Oscars on Hulu in the United States where the feed cut out because Hulu was so dumb that they did not think that the Oscars would go over time, which they do every year, so they cut it out at like 3.5 hours. Or maybe it was 3 hours and 45 minutes or something, and it ran 3:49. And so they didn't get to see what won Best Picture, or it cut out for a number of times before coming back. Frankly, stupid. But that's what streaming services are. They just basically look at whatever content is and whatever data they can glean from it. And it's a very kind of inhumane way to process movies, TV shows, all the content. So, in that respect, I'm a much bigger fan of giving the power to the people in terms of going to movie theaters, even though their, you know, popcorn strategy is kind of a weirdly conceived business model where it's like, oh, we'll get people to pay for snacks. I don't pay for snacks a whole lot, but I find when they, if I see a movie on premium video on demand, I won't go see it in theaters because I'm like, oh, it's already there. I'll just wait for it on demand. And, you know, it might be longer, um, but I'll wait for it. The problem is now is that a lot of people don't, and because of that, movies just stay 20 bucks for like ever now. And like Wicked came out at the end of December for 20 bucks. And then it didn't come down to 6.95 until March. Um yeah, it's no. That's not cool and I don't like it. And now movies are sort of skipping video on demand altogether. They want to kill it because they don't want anybody to pay 6.95 for it. What they want is basically somebody to pay 20 bucks or subscribe to a streaming service to watch it. So the ability to rent a movie from a video store like you used to be able to do is completely gone now, which drives me nuts because I was very supportive because it got to the point where there were some movies where the, like Wicked was available to buy locally on Blu-ray and DVD, and yet I couldn't get it from my library. Like, how ridiculous is that? Like, you have movies that have physical copies that have been shipped out, and I can't rent it for 6.95. Like, what is that garbage? Still, if I see a movie for 20 bucks on my TV, I'm not going to make the journey out to theaters to see it, which is why the exclusive theatrical window is worth it. But basically, because these movie studios have found a way to use their existing marketing campaigns to bring stuff to video on demand earlier and have, you know, the cable companies and streaming services take less of a share, it's more profitable for them. So theatrical matters less. So everybody shouting doom and gloom here just doesn't know the realities of the current markets. Um, you know, people say, "Oh, Warner Brothers spent 80 million on marketing. That was too much." Oh, I'm sorry. Are you a marketing intern or something. Um, like this guy even says in this Slash article, yes, Bong Joon-ho is a master filmmaker, blah blah blah, was a rounding success, but it only made this much, so why give him more money? Uh, this was a tremendous risk for a non-franchise film. Oh, I'm sorry, do you want more franchise films? Because every single weekend there's people online complaining that we need less franchise films, blah blah blah. But people have started to drink the Kool-Aid of like, why spend this much on something that's not IP? I don't know. Maybe because we're in the film business and that's what people want, and people want good movies regardless of where they come from. Like, the fact is, again, $19 million domestically, near 50 million worldwide opening weekend. For a film that cost, a little over 100 million, Warner Brothers also had a co-financing partner that contributed 10%, so their risk is really only over 100 million. This is something to take a risk on, because otherwise, why are you in the film business at all? And you got Tony Collette, you got Mark Ruffalo in it, providing good support. You also have Stephen Yeun, who's Oscar nominated. These are decent actors. Um, Now I know I'll give this film some points. This movie bouncing around the schedule for a long time did not help. I get that. That, like, when a movie hops around the schedule, um, that's always been a bad sign. For me, I noticed this first with X-Men and Dark Phoenix of like, oh, it's coming out. No, now it's coming out now. You are afforded as a studio one switch to go one time and theater, move your film one time. And it better be for a good reason. It better be like for Top Gun. Oh, we need more time to design the action sequences. Or, you know, we're moving this up to a better slot because we want and make it a full press release. If you move a film in their silence, that's not great. The other unfair thing is the reviews being good, not great. If they're good, in my opinion, they're good enough. Okay, like, it's not up to us to decide whether like, I remember when The Killer, which I did see in theaters and is a Netflix film, um the reviews initially for it were good, not great. The reviews for Elemental were kind of mediocre, but I had a reason to see it. You cannot, like, say, oh, this flopped because people looked at the reviews and saw that they were good, not great. Um, no. Like, they'll see, does this movie look good or not? It's an on-off switch. It's not like nobody goes out and says, oh, this movie's only 72% on Rotten Tomatoes, I'm not gonna see it, unless they're Aziz Ansari. And look what happened to him. His film career is a non-starter. You can't look like that. And this whole non-franchise, non-IP thing, I do not think that people won't go see a movie because people don't, like, maybe Reddit is filled up in social media with too many bots, that they think that when I go and see a movie that I'm gonna be like, "Oh, what kind of IP is this related to? Oh, it's not related to intellectual property that I'm familiar with. Well, I'm not gonna go then." Nobody thinks like that. They see a trailer, does it look good? They see the commercials, does it look funny or interesting? Does it ask a question that I want answered? Okay, I'm gonna see that. Um, the final thing that this stupid article, frankly, takes on is Robert Pattinson is only a true movie star in the right franchise. This is something that Scott Mendelson, who's a purported box office analyst for Forbes, takes on, and um, it's just wrong. Exhibitor Relations Company on Twitter is also wrong about this stuff. When they talk about actors like Will Smith or whoever as value added elements, whatever the hell that means, let me give you the God's honest truth. Because there are movie stars, like Tom Cruise and Leonardo DiCaprio, even Mark Wahlberg, that get films made. Their name attached gets films made because they're basically acting attract creditors. People want to be associated with the stuff they make. The truth of the matter is that no star matters. The film is the star, period. Um, People saying like, "Oh, Will Smith adds something to Aladdin." No, it's because it's Aladdin and the first movie was good, is why that made money. The reason Suicide Squad was good was because and good. It had a good trailer. It did have also won the Oscar for Best Makeup, which, fun fact, DC won an Oscar before Marvel did. Um, Marvel eventually won some technicals for Black Panther, but that's worth pointing out. Suicide Squad is a terrible movie, but I don't attribute to, you know, that movie because of Will Smith. Maybe he added 20 million tops, but the movie is the movie. It's its own thing. This idea of like movie stars and Notion is outdated and frankly wrong. Now, I'm going to say something that's going to hurt a few feelings here, but I don't think Robert Pattinson is a very great actor. He's an interesting character actor. I thought he was good in Uncut Gems, a movie which I didn't really even like that much because it was annoying and pesky. He picks great projects. He has a great agent. He surrounds himself with, great directors, going back to Canadian David Cronenberg. Post Twilight was kind of the reinvention of his career. And he was smart enough to decide, oh, I want to be a quirky character actor. And around that time, the industry basically started to change. And he got the right offers at the right time where Christopher Nolan's like, he's doing a younger film, he needs to attract a younger audience, so he does Tenet, and it's like, oh, who to get? I want a British actor. I'll get Robert Pattinson. He's done some interesting work. He's worked with Claire Denis, among, Cronenberg. He worked with Eggers, who I will say I don't agree with. I don't like many of his films, really none of them, but his craft and world is interesting and stuff like that. He's working with well-known directors with a distinctive look and taste, and people want to be associated with that. Um, Much different than his Twilight era career. Um, so what happened during that time is that men on the internet basically looked at Robert Pattinson and claimed him from the women who liked him for Twilight. Yeah, people were calling him Shovel Face or whatever before, at least on his trailer, Screen Junkies did, and making fun of him like, this guy or whatever. Many of whom, hadn't seen the movies and stuff. But you don't, well, I'll walk that back. You don't really need to see like a movie to get how someone looks. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of Josh O'Connor, so when I saw the trailer for Challengers, I'm like, I'll pass, you know. Um, so I walk that back. But this attitude that Robert Pattinson is only a true movie star in the right franchise, it's like, no, then he's not a movie star because a movie star can open a movie successfully. Okay? Um that's all you have to that's your one job as a movie star is be famous enough that people go see your movies. So, if you can't open a movie when you're the lead of it, then that's it. Like it doesn't work. Um, so he's not a movie star. He is a character actor. And it just so happened that he has a great agent, caught the turning tide at the right time, worked with Christopher Nolan, and then accepted Batman. The Christopher Nolan movie would have been a hit without him. Obviously, Batman would have been a hit without him. He just happened to be in it. And it's this desire of these kind of um, armchair analysts to sit back and go, "Oh, why this? I have nothing to write about. I can't look at the numbers really. Why is this a success? Oh, because this guy is in it and he was in a thing that I liked." But it's this whole bro community thing, and I frankly see the same thing with Henry Cavill, and it's just lame and shallow. Each movie that they're in or TV show or whatever should be judged on its individual merits. Um, it's okay to be biased as a fan and say, you know what, I like Henry Cavill. I like what he's done for, the Warhammer community. I like what he's done for gamers. I like, that he reflects some of myself in him. Robert Pattinson, he reflects some of his weirdness in me. I like that. I get all of that. But if you're gonna go that way, approach it as a fan. Don't like come up like you have some special sauce or information to say, oh, Robert Pattinson is a star, and then the it it wouldn't if he were a movie star, this movie would be a success. I frankly don't think that he's a movie star because a movie star, we've seen it sometimes, so we'll see how defensible this is, but like his character Mickey in Mickey 17 based on the trailers is something I had to get around. Like it did not appeal to me. That is not a movie star is able to play themselves in a way that the audience has a clear understanding of both who they are and how they link to the character in a relatable way. Jack Nicholson is one of the few people who can be both an actor, especially in his earlier work, and a movie star of like, oh, it's Jack Nicholson. I get it. I get who this character is. Um, Daniel Day-Lewis arguably could do this, but he just never has because that's just not his style. Although, fun fact, he is coming out of retirement to work on his son's film, so good for him for supporting that. But he's not a movie star. Um, Josh Hartnett is also another one who I think I wouldn't call overrated, but Josh Hartnett did a lot of bad movies early on in his career, and again has been somewhat resurrected by Nolan. Nolan has done this a few times. He did this with Rutger Hauer in Batman Begins, did it with Matthew Modine in The Dark Knight Rises. He did it with Tom Berenger in Inception. He always seems to like to get, a character actor kind of somebody who fell into obscurity and kind of give them a new life. It's kind of like a similar thing that Sylvester Stallone claimed to do on Expendables. He's like, I tend to pick people who were left out, who haven't gotten their shot in a while and stuff. And that's a very human thing to think. But the fact of the matter is, in terms of these movie stars, is that they are few and far between. And it's funny to me that, like, when I was a kid, the main movie stars were Will Smith, Tom Cruise, Adam Sandler, um, and Leonardo DiCaprio. And all of these years later, it's all of them still. And you still have Julia Roberts. You still have George Clooney, bizarrely, who is a movie star in terms of persona only. He can't really open a movie. Um, but he's dashing and he looks good for magazines and he says stupid stuff with actor brain all the time. You could sort of say that in the way of like Adrian Brody and stuff, although again, he's another person who falls into the strictly actor category. Um, if Robert Pattinson was a movie star, he would basically play himself and communicate that to the audience, and audiences would feel comfortable going to the movie because they like him. He plays Mickey as a character. He's in actor mode. So he's an actor, but he's not a movie star. A movie star plays themselves, translates that joy to the audience. It's communicable. Um, and does it in spades, and a lot of people go and see it. Chris Pratt, in my opinion, is a movie star, and he's also another one who's played it safe in terms of like going to do IP and stuff. He's also done weird stuff. I mean, I'm not going to comment on the State, the upcoming Russo brothers movie that he's in. Maybe I'll watch it. I don't know. The reviews aren't good at all, so probably not, but like Passengers is a movie he was able to open with Jennifer Lawrence by doing the smart thing that movie stars used to do, and Anyone But You kind of reignited is like, hey, I'm a movie star, but I can't carry a movie on my own. Let me pair with another movie star to help me out, and we'll share the load. And that's what Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell did for Anyone But You. That's what Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt did for Passengers. It's a tried and true formula that really build massive fan bases. And, if you neglect that fan base, you kind of end up in the situation where Will Smith did, where you alienate your audience, you start chasing other goals. Granted, Will Smith successfully chased the goal of an Oscar, so we'll see if he can get back to popularity now and stuff like that, um, and doing popular roles. But the fact is, like similar to Johnny Depp, is that when you achieve that level of gargantuan success, it is difficult to stay hungry. Like, Johnny Depp has won at life, essentially. And he's a talented actor, and basically, the Parts of the Caribbean, which is a fantastic creation, Captain Jack Sparrow. I honestly think that as he was nominated that year, he should have won Best Actor. Controversial choice, I know, but like 20 years later, it's all what we're thinking about. Now, I'm of the opinion that they could actually make, if they returned to the Turners and stuff like that, they could make a movie without Captain Jack Sparrow. He's a character who can be inserted and taken out at a moment's notice because he's a character who pops up. And I think later Disney Parts of the Caribbean movies relied on him a bit too hard. Basically, got to the point where he was paid so much that he never had to work again in his life. And it kind of ruined him a bit. You kind of He was brought back because the domestic abuse allegations with Amber Heard, which fascinatingly, as a trial, turned into, because trials, maybe it's why I'm interested in law, are a lot like movies. You don't know what the story is going to be, what audiences, in this case the jury, are going to respond to until the end. And it turned out that the story in that was basically they were both seen as liars. So who comes out as the better actor? And you see it a bit with Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, where Baldoni is in the wrong, and he's also the worst filmmaker. But Blake Lively has a worse publicist. So that's tough. Um, but with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard is a terrible actress, and basically tried, you know, because it's her role. She still is an actor. She tried to outact Johnny Depp, and Johnny Depp is just a better actor than Amber Heard, and that's basically what it was about. Um, he was way more sympathetic because he can play sympathetic really well. He was masterfully able to play the victim. He also, there was some trickery there with some bots and publicity firms that he had hired for people to, plant, and an army of bots to like plant, good stories, say good things about him on Reddit and stuff like that, to sort of amass an army and then take that army onto Instagram and stuff like that, and demonize Amber Heard. Amber Heard did herself no favors. But that's basically what it what that case turned into. And it was basically a movie. Like, it was a storytelling device, and somebody has to be the protagonist and somebody has to be the antagonist, and Johnny Depp won. Um What's he gonna do now? I don't know. He was asked if he felt canceled. He said, "No, I don't feel that way. I live on my own in France. I have friends. I don't feel like I've gotten less work." He still does, you know, perfume commercials or gets paid for them. Um, that's a win. He won at life. Does he need to act anymore? No, not really. And so you have a lot of these A-list actors who basically have won so much and made so much money that they're not as hungry, and they don't feel the same responsibility of themselves to bring in more audiences, to take risks in that. Adam Sandler pivoted from doing theatrical films, um, ending with the Grown Ups franchise, which made over 100 million, to sign a deal with Netflix. And he's been happy with them. That's why Happy Gilmore 2 is coming out on Netflix this year. Um, and that works for him. But the downside to that is that movies don't get released theatrically. Um, so yeah, the actual reality of movie stars is lesser, but you need to follow the playbook, and the playbook is this: star in a good movie, which, you know, if you've done that, then and you have a good scene, then you're already there, you're already in the conversation, you're already at go. Don't worry. The second thing you need to do is you need to take some kind of calculated risk where you basically update your screen time and shoulder more of the project, take more responsibility for it. This is something that Sydney Sweeney has also done really well. Although it's kind of fascinating that they're basically operating out of the Matthew McConaughey playbook of let me do a prestige TV show or a miniseries or something on the way up. And that was like a comeback and a reinvention for Matthew McConaughey to do True Detective and then follow that up with Interstellar. And people are still kind of working with that because the guy basically went from rom-com studio player to, prestige television actor as a sort of a reinvention, and then blockbuster movie star, and then won an Oscar. You know, he won an Oscar and then he followed it up with Interstellar. But unfortunately, you can't use that playbook to that extent because the great Jean-Marc Vallée, French Canadian director, passed away. Um, and he also directed Reese Witherspoon to an Oscar nomination. He directed not Pretty Little Liars, Pretty Little Lies, I believe that Big Little Lies, to several Emmys and whatnot. Um, and the second season wasn't as well received. Andrea Arnold directed that, but they didn't. It, from my understanding, didn't have the focus on actors and whatnot. But you can't follow that playbook anymore because somebody does it once and then, they become too big for their britches. It's not like the pathway is clear. Your pathway only works for you. As Ava DuVernay said, you can't compare um, anyone else's career to your own. Um, so yeah, I was listening to a podcast again on Blank Check podcast, and they said Whoopi Goldberg is a one of one. She's an EGOT winner. She won an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony, and she gets to say her opinion on TV every day. She's taken like supporting roles after doing super serious movies like The Color Purple, and then did comedies, and then went back, and then won an Oscar for Ghost, and then does daytime like it's insane. That playbook does not work for anyone else but Whoopi Goldberg. You know, like she took her name from a whoopee cushion. I kid you not. Um, so again, you can't really compare these do this basically sabermetrics analysis. It breaks down because you're talking about a very human profession. So if you're going to do box office analysis, just stick to the numbers. And yeah, that's all I'll say about Mickey 17. Uh, so moving away from that, I'll just get to the rest of the box office because there's not much to report. In its fourth week, Captain America: Brave New World opened. This movie cost 180 million conservatively. It actually probably cost more than that. Although, what happens is these studios give a very round figure to the trade magazines like Variety. They report on them. They don't push back on it or whatever, and they say, "Okay, you say it costs this much, fine." And then that way they can do their Hollywood accounting, saying, "Oh, it lost this much or made this much" when it's convenient to them. But this movie cost 188 million, and it's made about 179 million because there's no competition. Um, Over the weeks, it dropped by over 2/3 in its second weekend, um, and then it dropped by half, and then stabilized from there again because it doesn't have much competition. There aren't many action movies aside from Mickey 17, so that's what they're dealing with. That movie's doing fine. Moving on. Next on the list is Last Breath, which is in its second week. Again, this is a Focus Features film, which was directed by a documentary filmmaker who made the documentary on which this is based. It's a true story that follows a seasoned deep sea divers as they battle the raging elements to rescue their crewmate trapped hundreds of feet below the ocean's surface with 5 minutes left of air and 30 minutes before they can get to him. At about 15 million. I'm not sure how much it cost. I doubt it will say here because the way that these film sites are organized now is just piled high with meaningless information and advertisements now. Like it's frankly absurd how all of this has become unusable on my favorite websites. Box Office Mojo used to be so clear to watch, and now it's gutted. Thanks, Amazon. Um, but this movie is 90 minutes. That how much it cost is not good, but it reviewed well. And the documentary reviewed well, so it was like a good job on the studio's part, Focus Features, to kind of take this movie for one. They must have had like really solid footing and knew exactly how they wanted to make the movie, so good on them. Um, and then like I'm scrolling Rotten Tomatoes now to like, okay, what movie opened this weekend and stuff, and it's just a scroll of random movies. Here's what's top on streaming. It's like, oh great, what's top on streaming? Let me see here. Uh, The Gorge from a month ago. Yeah, that's useful. Heretic from November that played at TIFF, like Trap that played in August. How is this useful to me? Like and then you have people reviewing The White Lotus. The White Lotus hasn't finished yet. They got 6 out of 8 episodes. How can you possibly review a television series if you haven't seen the whole series? It's why reviewing television is tricky. It doesn't really often work. Um, you also have the studio, that Seth Rogen thing that I was talking about earlier. Um, it premiered at South by Southwest, 100% yay. It's a very fanboy crowd out there, so it's easy to get good reviews. I mean, Daredevil Born Again is at 86%, and visually that show looks like mush and isn't as good as the first show. Um, I wanted to mention how Last Breath was in terms of reviews. 79%. The popcorn meter is hot at 91%. Um, and the consensus is ratcheting up the tension to a riveting degree. Last Breath tells a remarkable true story with the utmost efficiency and a dependably terrific performance from Woody Harrelson. Last Breath, according to the audience, keeps you on the edge of your seat through an intense underwater journey, recreating an incredible true story of human resilience and comradeship. So, well-reviewed movie. It's sticking around. Uh, you know, um, let's go weekend to weekend here. It dropped by half, and it'll probably be available for $20, because it's under Universal next week, and then we'll wait forever for it to be 6.95 and stuff. Um, One thing I wanted to mention since we're on the subject of video on demand is the movie The Apprentice. This movie opened at Cannes Film Festival in May. It was done then. No distributor wanted to touch it, even though it was reasonably well reviewed. Um, so I haven't seen it yet. It gets a theatrical release by Tom Ortenberg, who's good at releasing what I would call socially conscious films. Many other people would. He did released Spotlight, which was about pedophilia in the Catholic Church, and he also released Dark Waters, which was about DuPont poisoning a local city. These are movies that represent the power of filmmaking in a very strong sense. Like they're movies about making statements, but not metaphorical ones. Statements about real living people and beings. So it's kind of socially responsible filmmaking as entertainment that I admire greatly. Anyway, that man created uh, his own distribution label called Briarcliff, and they were the ones who bought The Apprentice. And it did well. It was nominated for 2 Academy Awards for Best Actor and Best Supporting Actor. Um, a former member of uh, Donald Trump's team, Roger Stone, admitted, he's like, gosh darn it, Jeremy Strong from Succession and a bunch of other stuff, nailed Roy Cohn, like nailed it, that son of a bee should win an Oscar for it. And a lot of people were saying that, but of course everybody likes Kieran Culkin better. And then Sebastian Stan, who pulled off the miracle of promoting both A Different Man and The Apprentice while playing Donald Trump, is incredible. Um, in fact, no other, there were a lot of studios that didn't want to do, Variety and all of that, hesitated to meet with him for press. So the movie was kind of weirdly seen as radioactive because Hollywood is full of cowards. Meanwhile, the director, Ali Abbasi, was like, "Let me organize a screening with Trump. Let him see the movie," because it's basically about Trump as an apprentice to Roy Cohn, learning, how to navigate the world, and that's what it's about. Um, it's a movie I wanted to see, but it gets a limited release in October after opening at a festival in May, and then gets a Blu-ray release in Canada in December. And I've been curious because, again, I haven't seen it on video on demand. And so I asked Kojiko, I'm like, hey, when is this movie coming out on demand? And they said, oh, it'll come out tomorrow. Tomorrow is today. It's not out. So it's just kind of bothersome of like, hey, I'd like to see this movie that everybody's talking about that got 2 Oscar nominations. Looking at it, I didn't immediately like the visual style, but it is done in like a documentary type way, which I find interesting. And just seeing the clips of what I've seen of Jeremy Strong as Roy Cohen, I'm like, this guy sounds like someone else. It was so good that I was kind of like, is Sebastian Stan good in this, or is he just playing himself? And Sebastian Stan is a handsome guy, so I wondered, maybe if Trump saw it, I doubt he has. Um, maybe he would be flattered or something because they, for a while, tried to spin it as like the movie that the rest of Hollywood doesn't want you to see. Um, and it's in that kind of Trump no man's land of Apprentice, the TV show, where we all watched it growing up. Not we all, but I did. And it was a ratings hit, and now people are like, oh, F that show or whatever. It's a terrible show. And it's like, well, it's a well produced show that is the reason Donald Trump himself became president. Somebody said they should have The Apprentice, which was released on DVD, the TV show, on streaming because, there are no amount of incredible scenes. Somebody's like, there's a scene where Donald Trump forces Mayor Michael Bloomberg and billionaire Michael Bloomberg of, Bloomberg Tech and all that to buy a hot dog from Stephen Baldwin. And I'm like, that's kind of funny. Um, and, knowing what we know now, it makes you view it in a different light. So, anyways, The Apprentice television show is now available to watch in all its seasons on Amazon Prime. And I think about how the winner of the first season of that show, Bill Rancic, one, completed his 1 year contract with Trump, married Juliana Rancic of E Entertainment News, and they quietly like are in the camp, the hideaway camp of, Paul Ryan and stuff of like, yeah, I'm a Republican, but I'm gonna sit this one out. And we haven't heard a peep from either of them since Trump became president in 2016. Um, that's kind of fascinating to me. But yeah, I'd like to see that movie, and it's not available yet, so I'll keep you apprised of what's going on. Couple of other housekeeping things. Um, uh, I wanted to mention just in the state of movies is that we're still this year is the 10-year, I believe, anniversary of The Force Awakens, if I'm not mistaken. I always get confused whether it was 2015 or 2016. And it was 2015, yeah, as I suspected. I would still say that Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, is the most influential film of the last decade. It is also the most expensive film ever made, which a lot of people don't know. And the reason for that is that it was labeled as being expensive, but not that expensive. But it filmed in the UK, and the UK has a law where basically if the government, which does a lot of the funds of filmmaking, after a certain while releases how much these movies cost for the benefit of like taxpayers and stuff. It was revealed that like this movie cost $533 million, and then after taxes 447 million, making it the most expensive movie ever made. It ended up making 2 billion worldwide, $900 million domestically. Huge. And what that movie is essentially about, and I find it oddly prescient, is about making Star Wars great again. It's essentially about reanimating a dead corpse. That is Star Wars. It does it in a somewhat hacky way, but it's done by professionals. It's about a girl who Disney hired, um, Daisy Ridley. They decided to make Star Wars about a girl, this trilogy, after the Hunger Games made a pile of money, and they're like, oh, well, we can make Star Wars around women now, which is funny to me because it's like, as a film fan, action is action. I don't care who's in it. If it's like a good character, yeah, sure. But it's basically Sheen teams up with a black guy. And it's funny because there was a lot of racist dialogue that came out on the internet when he showed up. He was the first person seen in the trailer. And the actor John Boyega spoken of this, of just kind of like, yeah, I was like the front line of people were like, why are stormtroopers black? Which, by the way, is not a racist thing to ask because if you watch the prequel trilogy, you will know that the Samoan guy is the one who is Jango Fett, who all the clone troopers are cloned off of. So to ask, hey, why is, the first time somebody takes their helmet off is a black guy, what's the deal with that? And they were incredibly secretive about Star Wars, so they didn't know. And the rest of the media did not know this, so it became a whole race thing. And then, of course, after that, people got extra racist. As a lot of the internet unfortunately does now, very ugly stuff. But it's basically about reanimating a dead corpse, which is why it's called Awakens. The Rise of Skywalker itself is a continuation of that and sort of a resurrection of an even more dead corpse of Palpatine. But I just want to say, because I wrote this, just that I think The Force Awakens is without a doubt the most influential film of the last decade. It's the most expensive film ever made by a studio about assembling junk parts to, quote, Rey Skywalker, the garbage will do when her and Finn are being chased and they dig into the Millennium Falcon to take off. Ended up becoming the highest grossing film of all time at the North American box office. And ever since then, we've seen these Lego sequels of intellectual property, way late sequels to stuff. Dumb and Dumber was around this time. They made a sequel to that. Scream was resurrected. Ghostbusters was resurrected. All of these old intellectual property, like A Star is Born. Um, Bradley Cooper came to Warner Brothers. I'm not sure if he was into A Star is Born specifically, but they said, "Hey, that script idea you have about like a guy on the come up and a guy on the come down and a woman on the come up, that's similar to a movie that we have remade twice before of ours. So it'd be great if you repurpose this and repackage this." And it can create great stuff. I find The Force Awakens to be a very entertaining film. And somebody somewhere said something about there's a reason people return to the same stories. Frankenstein is being remade twice this year, again and again. And it's because they have various ways of reinterpreting text to communicate universal truths about humanity and the arts and stuff. And it feels like a safe sandbox to play in. But the bad thing about it is that it kind of reinforces elitism because the ultimate message of the Skywalker saga with the sequel trilogy is that Rey is the most powerful Jedi who ever lived because of her bloodline, basically. And that's a message that Ryan Johnson tried to steer clear of, but didn't entirely because it's like, who were they? They were nothing. Let's not talk about it or whatever. And instead of characterizing who her parents were because he wanted to maintain the Star Wars myth, he kind of left it open for J.J. Abrams to clean it up and come back and say, oh, and I don't like The Last Jedi, but I feel that it is let down further by The Rise of Skywalker, which has some incredibly great filmmaking in. It's just J.J. Abrams had half the prep time to do something which he wasn't good at, which was endings. He's great at beginnings, as he said, but this not so much. And it was basically corporate greed, and it ended up destroying Star Wars, and it's been in rebuilding mode ever since. They're coming out a month from now, or a month and a week from now, with Andor season 2, which is the final season, the 2 season series that leads into Rogue One, a Star Wars story. A movie that is a complete mess, which also has some good filmmaking in it. It's the first time I saw a film that was shot not on film but digitally look better than what film had been looking like at the time. The Force Awakens was shot on film. um, it was notable at the time that Rogue One was shot on 6K. But basically, ever since then, studios, as they've gotten bigger and bigger and absorbed more and more, they basically have become a factory or a conveyor belt. And the easiest way to feed them is intellectual property. Now it's almost easier if you have a podcast and it's successful, and maybe I should switch to a fictional podcast, but if you have a fictional podcast and you can like adapt that, people will take that as IP and make it into something and then option it for a movie. And that's like a better way of, making movies because you know, to go back to Seth Rogen, the Vancouverite, he was saying, I just think a lot of people are afraid of losing their jobs now. And they're like, oh, I made G.I. Joe. So that was the movie, that was the IP you wanted. So I made exactly the thing that you wanted. If you're defining something that isn't intellectual property based, you don't really know what it is until it's completed. Whereas with IP, there's certainty. And weirdly, I guess with stagflation and stuff, people are economically uncertain. Positive upside is that it leads to good art. So moving down the line, The Monkey, based on a Stephen King novel, doing okay. It only cost 13 million. It's at 30 million. Um, that's Blumhouse's model. Um, they're doing well. 50 million worldwide profit deal. Um, Paddington in Peru. Yeah, the Paddington movies do really well. That's IP. There's good British subtext about, immigration and whatnot. That did well reviewed, but not as well reviewed as the other two movies in the series. I've still yet to see Paddington 2, which people say is very good. Dogman, DreamWorks animated movie, does well. $88 million, 120 million overall. The cost of it, this is another argument that I got into with somebody on, or made fun of on Reddit, because somebody's like, what happened with Dogman? I thought it opened well, and now it's crashing. And I'm like, this is a 90-minute movie, children's movie, with no competition. Who cares if it opened to 35 million and then dropped the next week? All movies do that. This movie cost 40 million, it's made 120 million, and it's made by DreamWorks, which is owned by Universal Pictures. They'll be fine. So it's like, you know, a response to a guy said on the Redditor of like, Dogman is flopping. Should we be worried? No. Like, why are you worried about movies that you have nothing to do with, made by people who don't know you exist? All right, get offline and touch grass. Um, yeah, Nora is there. Added a bunch of theaters, went up a little. Still hasn't crossed 20 million. Um, they Neon, who's an independent distributor, chose to spend on awards, and it won 5 Oscars. So that's the better way to do it. But like making like just still under 50 million worldwide for a movie that many people can see consider to be the best of the year is not great. Then Mufasa, just crossed 250 million in America, 700 million worldwide. Like, That's why Disney will keep doing its live action remakes and sequels, even though many people don't consider it to be good. Rule Breakers, made by Angel Studios, a faith-based studio, about Middle Eastern women who live in a nation where educating girls is rebellion. A visionary woman sparks hope in opposition. Their courage ignites a movement that could transform their nation forever. Looking at the plot description, I do not know what this nation is. It's probably somewhere in the Middle East, but they don't want to say it. And it's about female robotics. It's think of it like an inspirational sports Disney movie. And then In the Lost Lands, made by Paul W.S. Anderson. So, you know, it sucks. I like Mila Jovovich, but again, she's directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, a guy who sucks because A, he doesn't make very many good movies. He's known for the Resident Evil series, and he directs his stunt people in an unsafe way, which led to a stunt woman being paralyzed and having her arm amputated on Resident Evil: The Final Chapter, a movie that I like. And again, I like Alien vs. Predator, which came out over 20 years ago, and Mortal Kombat, which similarly isn't great per se, but was schlocky fun. Um, yeah, he's a bad director. Most of the stuff that he makes is horribly reviewed and flops. Moving on. That's basically the long and short of the box office. A Complete Unknown, is hanging around there, uh, just under 75 million. Did some money for Focus Features, and cost 60 million. That was the one where somebody pointed out, because again, Reddit having the conversation of like, why is this movie so expensive? Brr. And it's like, well, they recreate a period of New York in like the 60s. So what they did was they hired professionals and they didn't skimp on costs and they got their rate. So it is expensive because they did a good job. Okay. So again, like somebody's like, oh, Novocaine, which is well reviewed and opens this weekend. Um, an action comedy film. It's revealed that that costs 18 million. Somebody's like, yeah, now we're talking, and it's like, yeah, but it looks like a small movie. It's good. I want to see it, but to me, it looks kind of like a streaming movie. So maybe I'll probably wait for it on Paramount Plus because it just looks like a souped up TV show. But you know, um, the Jack Quaid's previous movie Companion, which has been sitting in the premium pile on video on demand for a while. I've been wanting to see that open at the end of January. Extremely good reviews. Really want to see it, but waiting for it to go down nonetheless. So that is where I am at the box office. And what I was just going to cover to finish off is my Letterboxd diary from last week. So I'll go back and just go through a bit. Oh, those are my popular reviews. The Hunter is my most popular. How about that? Wouldn't have expected a movie from the 50s that people like the most. But anyways, so I ended with The Wild Bunch last week. No, I ended with How the West Was Won. Um, and just wanted to point out or reiterate, because I think I ended on The Wild Bunch, is that with How the West Was Won, um, got it in a Blu-ray 3-pack with The Searchers and The Wild Bunch. The audacity of this film. There is a buffalo stampede in this film, which successfully captures what The Legend of Tarzan, which I saw in theaters, failed to do with CGI by using real animals, destroying real sets in front of real people mostly. How did they do this? Like, there's a buffalo stampede with actual buffaloes and people lying down. I imagine that they're dummies. I did it that they're trained stunt performers, but I don't know the magic of movies. Like, it looks incredible. It happens to be in a very long film. There's a rapid river rafting sequence that's very obviously shot in studio for half of it, but when you look at the master shots, it looks like it was done by stunt people on an actual white rapid river in a real raft. It's incredibly brave filmmaking, and this is what filmmaking is all about, to be the first to do something, but if it didn't happen on camera, then it didn't happen. I like seeing the cast of Jimmy Stewart, John Wayne, Gregory Peck, Henry Fonda, Debbie Reynolds, Harry Dean Stanton, and Eli Wallach. Narration by Spencer Tracy, who won, back-to-back Oscars. The only problem, the dreadfully slow pacing of the first story. I tried watching this on DVD when I was a kid. I was so bored I shut it off before it got going. It looks beautiful with its three camera setup. What they did was they did ultra wide camera gimmick where they put three cameras beside each other and filmed across that way. So there's like three film strips. So you see the discoloration sometimes, but they remastered it in about 2008. So um, it looks incredible. Because they cleaned it up and remastered it. This is the kind of Cloud Atlas, like once in a generation movie every working actor should aspire to be a part of, which was Cloud Atlas, one of Tom Hanks's favorite films that he's ever made, that earned its spot in movie history. Cloud Atlas, by the way, cost 100 million. They did not have the 100 million, or wasn't secured, and Tom Hanks was on board from the beginning. And this was a movie made from the directors of The Matrix. That was about six stories across time of human history, from the past to the future, 1,000 years from now. Really incredible filmmaking. The only misstep they do is they do Yellowface, which it doesn't look good. And I don't mean like it looks bad politically and stuff. I could care less about that when it comes to art. It's just that it looks bad visually. Like uh, Jim Sturgis does not make for a convincing Asian. Okay, his hair is the hair and wigs is really bad. Why that movie got a best makeup nomination, I don't know. I guess for the audacity of it. But anyways, they weren't sure if that film was going to get made, and they're like, okay, well, on Monday we're going to go on a plane to Germany, and Tom Hanks just said, okay, I'm going, and people thought, okay, well, this isn't a certain thing, but if Tom Hanks is going, I'm not going to miss it. I'll go. If Tom Hanks is going, I'll go. And that's kind of what filmmaking is about. There was another movie I saw, um, if I can find it on here, um, where uh, people were like, I didn't know if this was gonna get made, but they were like, if so and so is going, if you promise to show up, then I'll do it. Um, and yeah, that's what filmmaking is about. It's a leap of faith. Um, Venom: The Last Dance I watched. I actually got a notification that was available at my library today to pick up. I saw it on Crave, so I don't need to see it. It is a harmless, bad movie. Nowhere near as enjoyable as the first two. Watching it on Crave at home, I was looking at my phone during the climactic action sequence. Like, I love action sequences. Action is my favorite genre. For me to look at my phone, which I am very resistant to do, um, even at home, that I was so bored that like gets to know that like it's just nothing matters in this movie. There are very few new ideas, and it doesn't tell a story well. It's just basically Venom wandering around, and then you know spoiler alert for Venom: The Last Dance, but it, sacrifices himself and then has a Maroon 5 montage at the end of all the good times that they had. Um, Ridiculously corny. The fact that this movie was number one for 3 weeks in a row, despite its horrid, like, filmmaking, uh, is stupid. And there isn't even much of a Last Dance. Um, So, I don't know. That's just it's funny to me that people audiences love Venom. 478 million wide. It was number one at the box office for 3 weeks. Um, that's insane. Um, yeah. So moving on. Um, so Wicked. Okay. Okay. So Wicked is the last of the major Best Picture nominees that I had yet to see. And I was really looking forward to it. And if you watch this podcast or listen to this podcast, because most of the time it is audio only, um, I had hesitancy of seeing this film in theaters because they were very big on, despite not having the sing-along version, excuse me, despite not having the sing-along version ready, uh, have regular people sing in the theater. Um, and that just didn't seem like a fun experience to me as a film goer. Like, I go to hear the movie sing, not you. So, Kingston is way more respectful of town. Um, so, was that going to encounter? No, not likely. But, there's still some people. And I didn't want to participate in that. I thought that was kind of destructive to, I don't consider movie going as sacred or sacrosanct as other people do, but it's still an experience that you pay for that should have value. And I found that that devalues it. And for everybody saying, It's a public space," it's not a public space. You pay money to get in there, it's a private space. Anyways, so here's my take on Wicked. Elphaba is an outsider who doesn't connect with humans, aside from her sister, who's in a wheelchair. Galinda, who frames this story, is played by Ariana Grande as a mean girl, like a mean popular girl. The two are brought together, they go to wizarding school, uh, by plotting and a hint of character. Alphaba shows promise, and Galinda wants to be close to, she says in her own song, popular. But they never find common ground, really. As such, I never bought into their sorority, their sisterhood that builds up much of the movie. They become friends and stuff like that. I don't buy it. So I don't feel like heartbroken or anything for them. I don't care for their friendship. Um, you see on the poster of Wicked, Elphaba reaching out to Glinda, who having changed her name for image reasons. But it never happens in the movie. This is a story about two thin characters who, in part due to the structure of the film, do not change at all. Because the movie just is an adaptation of the first act of the musical of Wicked. Um, uh, this is a story about two thin characters who, in part due to the structure of the film, do not change at all, and despite the poster, do not reach out to each other. The movie also, and this is a minor spoiler, fatally robs Glinda of the choice to join Alphaba by having the guard seize her just as her inner conflict is brewing between them. Due to decisions like these, the movie fails to generate any dramatic tension. Yes, it's basically, I'm just going to spoil sort of the ending of it. And again, it's only act one of the story. Wicked for Good comes out in November of this year, Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving. Um, yeah. They go to see the Wizard of Oz, and turns out that the wizard is not all he's cracked up to be. And they need a powerful woman like Alphaba who does real magic. This is always done annoyingly in fantasy things of like, oh, real magic, but I can only like lift a quarter or something like that. Like, now granted, this is written into the books by Frank L. Baum, so it makes sense for, the Wizard of Oz and whatnot, but it's nonetheless tropey. So much of this movie is tropey. The Wizarding School, tropey. The lame framing story, tropey. There's a lot of tropes in this movie, but the filmmakers know how to use them, but it doesn't make the movie any more exciting. But basically, they go and meet the wizard, and he turns out to be like evil, and Alphaba thinks that's terrible, which is fascinating because she's the Wicked Witch of the West, and the Wicked Witch of the East, her sister, quote unquote, um, uh, thinks, well, maybe he's trying to do, something for good, you know. And it's fascinating because I do square this with Oz the Great and Powerful, the Disney movie that James Franco was in. It's so weird to me. They hire Jeff Goldblum, who can't really act at this point. He just basically plays Jeff Goldblum as the Wizard of Oz. So he's just doesn't bring a whole lot to the table. I think of James Franco's portrayal of like basically a con man um, becoming the Wizard of Oz, who is again then taken from the 1939 movie. And again, this is all in the books and stuff like that. But I think about that, and especially in context of James Franco, who is radioactive because, he basically took the power that he had, which was a famous actor, and used it to take advantage of students and young women and stuff like that. That's very sorry, on brand, in character for what we know about the Wizard of Oz, or as Kamala Harris would refer to him as the dude behind the curtain in the movie The Wizard of Oz. Um, anyway, yeah, Kamala Harris, kind of a goof there. Anyways, hope you're not too democratic. Uh, yeah, that's a big conflict there, like an ideological rift that would send this movie home if they like nailed that. But instead, they just kind of have Ariana Grande's character be annoying and then like kind of off to the side. And then they have the woman be powerful and kind of frame it as a girl boss narrative. Um, I found that short serving of the material. I'll go on. Director John M. Chu, who, I misspelled his name. He doesn't have an H in his name, John, there. He knows how to mount a production for sure. I've been on board with him since G.I. Joe Retaliation, a movie that I personally like. Um, but his decision just to put on Act One of a two-act musical is an affront to the medium of cinema that comes across as a cynical cash grab, and is. The movie lacks the complexity to justify a 2-hour, 40-minute runtime. But then I'm sure the film's fan base would cry foul when the obviously gay love interest Fierro doesn't get his The Library song about how shallow his second-tier character is. This movie was obviously made by fans, but that's the problem. They put on their fan hats, not their filmmaking ones. When Galinda, before her name change, sings Popular, one of the musical's two good songs, aside from Defying Gravity, which the movie ends on, it's a flattering imitation of the Kristen Chenoweth version. Keep in mind, I've never actually seen the play itself. It's just so popular that I know her and I know the version. Later on in the movie, when Chenoweth and her co-star, the wickedly talented Idina Menzel, yes, that's what that's from, show up for their respectful cameos, they blow the two leads, who are very talented vocalists in their own right, completely out of the water. Cynthia Erivo sung before she sang on the soundtrack for Harriet, playing Harriet Tubman, a very good performance, and Ariana Grande, can do whistle tune and stuff. They have the range, they don't have the power that these two characters have. And when Hollywood is doing a musical, they always make this mistake. It's like, oh, we'll get a guy with good vibrato and stuff like that. I want powerhouse vocal performers, okay? If it's a musical, just get me the best singers in the world, okay? Acting is easy. Anybody can do it. This idea that we kind of need somebody who's a bit of a star and kind of need this and that, like, it it makes some sense. People thought that Ansel Elgort was a bad choice in West Side Story. I did not think so. I thought he was actually fine um, for the role. And, I'm not one to defend Ansel Elgort or anything like that, but he did fine in that movie. And it's like, oh, we need a guy. Okay, the guy who was in Divergent and Baby Driver, there you go. And then, the online rigmarole, which is what's happening with Rachel Zegler now, and Gal Gadot, who, by the way, both obviously differ strongly on the Israeli-Palestine conflict. Gal Gadot is Palestinian. Um, the Rachel Zegler is from Colombia, or has family that's from Colombia. I imagine that she's like a bit more Palestinian. Nonetheless, guess what? They were able and are able to do promotion with each other as actors fine. And nobody can, but again, I'm not a fan of Gal Gadot's politics at all. She basically caused a fight, or she held a pro-Israeli movie in downtown LA, was supposed to show up, didn't show up for the premiere, and then caused a massive fight broke out when the movie got screened, which he took no responsibility for. To me, that's being a bad ambassador. Um, but guess what? With actors, the only thing that matters that I care about is between action and cut. Okay? So, you know, um, people getting on about Rachel Zegler for what reason? Oh, yeah. It was because of in this movie, she said about Snow White, which is the first animated movie ever from 86 years ago in 1937. Rachel Zegler said, "We're updating this a bit to have the main character of Snow White have more agency rather than just stuff have happen to her. So she's not going to be saved by the prince." And people took that as a kind of like weird affront of like, "How dare you?" And it's a very like upset the establishment when all she was doing was promoting the movie. And as a result, now Disney canceled the premiere of the movie because, everybody gives a shit about the photos of the Hollywood premiere. Ridiculous. Also, Snow White is a very dress-oriented Disney princess, so the fact that there's not going to be a red carpet dress bothers me a bit more than it would for other movies. So that's like ridiculous. But cast Gal Gadot as an evil queen, great casting. Cast Rachel Zegler as Snow White, I sort of see it, but, again, continuing the Disney trend of ugly visual looking movies um, that kind of look like a mess, don't look like real movies. Will it make money? I don't know. I kind of don't hope so. Um, and Zegler needs a better agent. But decent casting. It's just, yeah, that movie looks ugly and feels like a waste of time. I'm not sure if I'll see it. It looks kind of unwatchable. Like it looks ugly, and I'm not a huge fan of the original Snow White, though my dad got it on both a Laserdisc and um, VHS and DVD. It's the first film he bought 3 times. Um, anyway, moving back to Wicked, the film which Wizard of Oz, by the way, came out 2 years after Snow White. The film has a brilliantly restrained racial subtext to it that I find remarkable. Elphaba is green, but she's coded black, and of course, being a black major studio movie, of course they have to have a white dad and uh like a light-skinned kid. Like is this a rule in Hollywood movies now? It's like you can't have somebody who's too black, where they'll have a black character, but then they'll have like a white wife or husband, and then they'll have a light-skinned kid. And it's just weird to see. It's very weird. Um, it's like you're gonna go black, go all in, you know? I mean, that's what I would do. And it's something the black community has spoken about a lot because it's in part whitewashing. No offense to the actors playing them. And an actor, Justice Smith, spoke about it, who's a light skin. I hate referring to actors as like light skin because their skin color is pretty much irrelevant. Unless you're talking about, specifically black stories and all that, but most of the time it's like completely irrelevant. Um, Amandla Stenberg, I believe her name, um, decided not to um, appear in Black Panther because her skin wasn't black enough or something, she said. But just know that it's a sore spot for movie and filmmaking. What this movie does brilliantly is kind of underlie that of like Elphaba is a essentially a black woman and seen as different, and because of that, she can't help but draw attention to herself, which raises the ire of Glinda, played by Ariana Grande. Again, brilliant casting because Ariana Grande used, skin toner for years to make herself more brown, more olive skinned, more Latina. Um, and she's white. She's completely white. I thought that she was wearing foundation, and maybe she is, but she might actually be really pale. And she's very, very pale in this movie, and also very, very skinny. I don't know what happened because Cynthia Erivo is thick, and was thick and everything else. But then on the red carpet, and this was the most expensive marketing campaign that any movie has had, Wicked. They spent a record amount of money on it, and like 200 million range, like something like 220 million. In marketing alone, premiered it on absolutely everything, and it was a big hit movie. Um, One of the top of the year. It was the only movie in the top 10 actually that wasn't a sequel. Uh, if I can go through it here, just going back because we're closer to the end now. Um, so if we look at the top 10 movies, you have Inside Out 2, sequel, Deadpool and Wolverine, which is technically Deadpool 3. They don't call it that. That's why I said technically. Number 3 is Wicked. Um, and so that's not a sequel. You have Moana 2, Despicable Me 4, Beetlejuice, Dune Part 2, Twisters, Mufasa, The Lion King, Sonic the Hedgehog 3, Godzilla X Kong, The New Empire, Kung Fu Panda 4, Bad Boys Ride or Die, which is Bad Boys 4, Gladiator 2, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which is Planet of the Apes 4 in the reboot series. Then you get down to It Ends With Us. So that's like 15 movies in a row that are all sequels um, at the top of the box office. That's what's ruling. We're not getting anything new. And then It Ends With Us is like completely blows up as a franchise because, legal problems. And then Wild Robot, yeah. And then, you have to go down to number 21 if the John Krasinski movie that it's like the only one that's not based on anything. So, anyways, the movie's subtext serves as the kind of themes that elevate blockbusters like this to legendary status, and coupled with Oscar winning costumes, they were fantastic. And production design, also fantastic, that are best in class. Um, it also has decent cinematography, although the kind of stone-washed out look is kind of like dreary. It's this attitude that Hollywood does, and I noticed this first on the Fast and Furious movies, where they'll do an incredible stunt and then bizarrely paint over it with CGI to make it look smoother, and it just ends up making it look more fake. This movie kind of has a bit of that. Like, you need special effects to have a bit of the grit so that they look real. This movie also has a tiny bit of film grain in it, which I find funny because it looks more crisp otherwise than any film that I've ever seen. Um, just visually crisp. Um, I also thought it was interesting how John Chu mixed the film, and he spoke about this that movie theaters are playing it too low, and it needs to be play. They're playing it at a 5, and it needs to be played at a 7. I noticed that watching it of like, oh, I had to turn up the volume on this significantly. Like they went quiet for some reason. And I don't know why they did that. Maybe they just like got stuck and just stayed to their track. But anyways, um, the problem is that all this movie has going for it. The film, after about 45 minutes, really starts to drag. I haven't seen part 2 yet, but it seems like the wizard is Alphaba's father. I haven't seen the play or read the book on which it's based. The movie never explains what makes Alphaba so special, which comes back to my gripe about the part 1 of it all. If you are making a multi-part movie, you must solve at least one part of the equation or provide audiences a different, more interesting equation to solve by the end of the movie. Alpha begins as an outsider and ends as an outsider. Glinda starts off snide and ends snide. Jeff Goldblum is tiring now and forever Jeff Goldblum. If this movie were to be good, then I would need to feel by the end of the movie that something has changed within me, as they say in the movie. Wicked does not have that magic. I'm very proud of that review, actually, that I wrote off. Um, I really think I should post it online on my website. I think I will. And finally, a movie I saw last night, Better Man, $100 million Robbie Williams biopic. What? Um, Bohemian Rhapsody didn't cost that much. Now, it cost that much because they wanted the CGI on the ape to look good, and the movie looks fire. It's directed by music video director Michael Gracie, but also the Greatest Showman director Michael Gracie. And Michael Gracie has some good imagery they can do that he taps into as a music video director, but he cannot, for one, connect the dots on this story, which is basically a story of a asshole who becomes a pop rock star, um, and splits from his band called Take That, who I only actually learned about recently. And it's basically about a guy who thinks he's better than he is. there was a whole hilarious crisis on film Twitter of like, yeah, this is a British movie of everyone saying the most successful pop star of all time, Robbie Williams, and they're like, yeah, sure, buddy. I have no idea who Robbie Williams is. Like, I always think of Robin Williams and stuff. Um, so everybody was like, when X was undergoing like, a lockout or whatever and crashed in America, which it does because Elon doesn't hire enough people for that because he wanted to cut costs. Um, Twitter was down in America, and somebody was like, okay, does everybody on this app know who Robbie Williams is? And the fact is that I only know of him because he did the song Rock DJ. But I found out that he got back together with his band afterwards, and they did some music, and some of the music is good. Is any of that music in this movie? No. Um, the title is taken from one of his songs, I guess, Better Man. So shouldn't it be about a guy who's an ape that learns to be a better man? The most significant relationship he has in the movie is with his father, who wasn't a good man, and I guess learns to forgive or at least understand by the end of the movie. And they do a rendition of My Way, which they used to watch as father and son. And it's about the fourth at least best version of My Way. The Paul Anka version, because Paul Anka wrote the song. The Sinatra version, of course, which is number one. He wrote it for Frank Sinatra after Sinatra thought he was finished, um, and is a perfect capstone to any career. Then you have Seth MacFarlane, who sang it in Sing, using Frank Sinatra's singing coach, actually, who was like young at the time and taught Frank Sinatra. He taught Seth MacFarlane to sing show tunes. And then there's this version. And they sing it at Royal Albert Hall, which I was thinking, hey, there's where the Dua Lipa concert went. Hey, I like Dua Lipa. Robbie Williams' songs aren't that good. And it's basically filled this entire movie, which feels very long. And the fact that they made this for $100 million is a miracle. Um, Maybe they did it in a producer's thing so that they could take like the buyout or whatever and not pay any extra grosses to people or something. It amazingly reviewed super well. But and was nominated for best visual effects, which it lost to Dune because let me tell you, Dune is a better movie, and this tells a pretty terrible story. Um, yeah, Robbie Williams, one of the greatest entertainers of all time. Yeah, sure. Under the visionary direction of Michael Gracie, the greatest showman. Sure, no. But this is like 88% certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes with a 90% popcorn meter. This movie sucks. I would not recommend it to anyone. You know what? I gave it a half star. And I appreciate the depth of work that went into the special effects on this movie. But people were talking about it at TIFF. And I'm like, I kind of don't want to see it. Um, 77 on Metacritic. It is not a good movie. It runs through every single trope of the musical biopic, which, by the way, my frame of reference for the definitive, I wouldn't say definitive, but like definitive in the sense of the musical biopic formula is Ray, where it's like, you know about his childhood, you know about his drug use, you know how it's negatively affecting him, you know that he's talented, you know about his relationships and struggles to connect with women and stuff like that. I find Ray does that better than, well, maybe not, than Walk the Line, which is, they're kind of one and one. Ray is 2004, Walk the Line is 2006. And then, A Complete Unknown, which if it ever comes to Disney Plus, we'll eventually see. But it has to come within the next month because my Disney Plus price is going up from after taxes 131 to 146, and I'm not paying that money, not for a year of Disney Plus when they have basically released crap for the last decade. No, I'm not doing it. I've told my family. Um, so we'll see. But yeah, um, ain't paying for that. But hopefully, A Complete Unknown, which is also a Best Picture nominee, was one of the ones that it was the most nominated movie that went home with absolutely nothing. Which goes to show that I was right in not picking it to see in theaters. It made some money though, which is good. But yeah, Better Man goes through every single cliche in such an uninspired tone, And another thing that I want to point out about this and Wicked is like, okay, you spent 100 million on these movies, more than 100 million in the case of Wicked, like 150 million. Um, you have the best sound engineers in the world, the best film crews in the world, all of the money you would need behind you, and the choreography in both of these movies suck. Like, I watched Hello Dolly from the 60s, just a bit of it on TV, and I was laughing about how absurd, over the top, amazing the dance choreography is. Now, that is a movie that only could have been made at the height of the musical boom, and I was just amazed. There's also really good dancing in Spielberg's West Side Story, which I also mentioned earlier. That's another $100 million movie. Um, the guy who did the costumes for it, by the way, Paul Tazewell, ended up doing the costumes for Wicked and winning the Oscar as well. So, like, if you're going to spend this much money and go there, and there's one great shot of Robbie Williams hanging upside down again as an ape, and then doing a 180-degree turn, zoom out of like a giant festival audience and stuff. That's cool, but they're not telling a good story. So, like, who cares? I don't feel that Michael Gracie is personally connected or inspired by Robbie Williams. He just seems like a twat. If the movie is called A Better Man, it should be about a guy who learns to be a better man. And he should learn to be a better man by going through this career and realizing the truth of, like, I am not as good on my own despite my phenomenal stage presence. And I've seen him and he's good on stage, one of the best. I just saw him do Rock DJ, on Graham Norton and stuff. The way he spins the mic, he does the timing well and stuff. This movie is not even about stage presence at all. And the music that Take That made was good and better than Robbie Williams' music. It would be like, imagine if somebody made a Beatles movie about George Harrison, and George Harrison said, "Oh, I'm better than you guys. I'm gonna go off and make my own stuff because I'm better." Or I don't care. The one nice grace note of this movie is when that scene happens in this movie, they're like, Robbie, we think we're gonna go off on my own, and he's just like, yeah, sure, whatever, thinking the same thing. Can I take this watermelon? That's a nice thing. But this movie goes on forever. It was a struggle to get through. It's 2 hours and 11 minutes. Why? Like, this is a 90-minute story. Like, oh, I don't know how a concert works. I don't know what being a pop star is like. I've seen the movies. I know show business. The weird thing is that, like, the third most important character in the movie is the guy's band manager. You know what the climactic scene between him is? The ape, who's uh Robin Robbie Williams, is meeting with a fan who, again, like, they don't acknowledge his difference or whatever. And I'm getting a bit explicit here, but the fan encounter involves the fan basically tugging him off. And, like, he makes direct eye contact with his band manager and finishes. And, like, that's the last you see of the guy. And it's just kind of like, okay, well, that's weird. And that's just basically this movie. It's just like a pointless, expensive oddity. Um, and yeah, that's all I've seen. And yeah, moving on to games news now. Uh, Xbox Copilot has been introduced as a concept, publicly announced, and it will basically be an AI program which will coach people through video games. An idea which I like, because this is an idea as a kid that they've talked about since I was a kid, and helping you through difficult parts in the game. I think that's great. I think that's super accessible for gamers. The problem is that they spoke about it in terms of Overwatch, which is a multiplayer game. So you're telling me that basically people, humans, when playing against other humans, are going to be AI assisted to play against each other. That does not work for me, because eventually what you're going to have is people who learn to play the way that AI teaches them to play, and AI only teaches them to play based on existing material. So they'll probably mine all of the free content on YouTube and stuff. Um, they'll mine it, strip mine it, and then uh, teach people to play one way, and people will just learn to play one way. Then in all likelihood, it could be beyond that, but it's like, oh, like companies aren't even hiding it anymore. It's like, oh, here's how people are going to get ripped off. Yeah, the um, AI is going to teach people how to play one way, and then everybody will play that way against each other, and somehow I think we'll come out of this more miserable. Um, Optimistically, it'll be good for single player games. I greatly, deeply support that, but I don't know. It hopefully it doesn't, get too abused or turn into a fiasco. If it does, I'm sure Xbox will turn it off, but Xbox has introduced a lot of terrible features over the years where, well, let me tell you, they've made gaming kind of worse. So like they made online more expensive. They ate up a lot of third-party publishers and didn't like where's Perfect Dark? You know, where's Banjo-Kazooie? They're sitting on this IP and just not using it. Um, and that's frustrating to me. Like, how many Nintendo Banjo Kazooie games could we have gotten by now? They also own Crash Bandicoot, you know? Um, so that's what's disappointing to me. Um, I'm still working on completing um, Cyberpunk 2077. Haven't returned to it since I last spoke, so I won't speak about it more. Um, Nice little thing is that I complained about the prices at my local game store, posted it to Reddit, and the feedback that I got for a lot of them was like, yeah, some of these prices are absurd, but a lot of them are actually really fair when you consider that they have to house them there, and that's the point of the store, and they have to make money and stuff. And I'm like, okay, I feel a little bit better there. But the problem is that one of the games they sell, Wii Sports Club, which is a remake of Wii Sports, needs an online update to function, and it doesn't. Um, so that's a bummer. Um, The other thing about gaming, though, is that I went to another Hawk shop, and for $5, I found a Lego City Undercover, which is basically um, Grand Theft Auto in Lego form. So I'm excited to play that once I finish Cyberpunk. The annoying thing is, I'd like for my nephew to play it, but the Wii U tablet is like so sacred, I can't have it break. Um, and it's a one player only game, and I usually get them to play on the Wii mode as a second player. So that's tough. I'll have to wait for him to be a little bit older and stuff. I am intent on preserving these games. Um, some of them have disc rot, and again, there was a report of Warner Brothers disc rot from movies made from 2006. It was actually a story broken by JoBlo.com, who I used to work for, happily, and it produced a follow-up statement from Warner Brothers who said, "We will replace anything that has disc rot." I've checked many of my Warner Brothers movies from that on DVD. They're all fine. It's this kind of myth that people are bringing up, and you can see in an interview with the great William Friedkin, where I think it's Nicholas Winding Refn they're talking about, or Woody Allen or something. They're talking about the deterioration of like DVDs, and he's like, what do you think about Peter Bogdanovich, who says that movies, DVDs from the 1990s don't work anymore. And William Friedkin is like, Peter Bogdanovich doesn't know shit. He's like, I have DVDs that are as old as that now. They work completely fine. And they're like, what? And he's like, yeah, he doesn't know what he's talking about. You know, uh, love Friedkin. You know, there's a term or a time or a feeling, a style, I don't know what, of just like being gleefully a hater sometimes. It's not really hate. It's kind of love of the genre, love of what you do, that you kind of protect it. That is what I want to channel here. So thank you for listening on the 50th episode. Next time, I'll have an update for a script that I'm reading, that I'm just going along with the chance to direct. The lovely Jeffrey Calhoun sent me a script to read, and I'll be looking into it. So I'll have an update for you on that. And yeah, tell you more about Last of Us Season 2, maybe looking forward to it, White Lotus, and my recommendation, which I might have mentioned on previous episodes, but I'll just cover my base. It's available on Crave, is Paris Has Fallen, the television adaptation of the Has Fallen series. Some pretty good fights in it, decent relationship about, basically a spy and a local policeman or the government agent working together to catch a terrorist who's played from the bad guy, Sean Harris, of Mission Impossible 5 and 6, the guy who played Solomon Lane. Solid watch. Recommend it. So, take care, and I'll see you online, in games, and at the movies.